hear me okay? My name's Amanda. I'm the Accessibility Services Coordinator at Great Bay Community College. I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. We're going to be talking specifically about how accommodations work with early college. Maybe if I can get my slideshow to work. Here we go. All right, so just a quick agenda, what we're hoping to discuss today. It's not anything hugely big as far as material. Hopefully this will be like a informative discussion. Shauna mentioned that she's going to be managing the chat, so please feel free to ask questions on things that maybe you've experienced or anticipate having questions on from students. We're going to start with some introductions. We're going to talk about the definition of disability. We're going to talk about the differences between high school and college, the process on the end for the student, teacher responsibilities, and then we have some examples as well to share uncommon things that we think some of you might run into. So before we get started on the definition of disability, I just wanted to give an opportunity to my counterparts to introduce themselves. So again, my name is Amanda Vos. I'm the Accessibility Services Coordinator at Great Bay Community College. So I work with all of the students who are affiliated with Great Bay that might need some disability accommodations. I'm going to hand it off to you, Melissa.
My name is Melissa Olson. I'm the Accessibility Coordinator for Manchester Community College. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for coming today, and we hope that you learned some things that you can spread to your counterparts.
And my name's Joanna Willis. I'm the Accessibility Services Coordinator for NHTI. Thank you for joining us today.
And then Lynn, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lynn Bacon. I am the Accessibility Coordinator way up north at White Mountains Community College. So I'm here if you guys have any questions, but I'm very excited that we have this opportunity to kind of share the knowledge with everyone. And Amanda, thank you for this.
And I don't know, Jody, are you on the call?
Yes, I can.
I don't believe
Okay.
she is.
Yeah, I don't see her. I'm looking in the
Okay.
participants.
I just wanted to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves that might be joining us. There are a couple people that are out of the office today, so they might not be able to attend. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to link the webpage for each of the 7 community colleges accessibility services webpage. That will give you the contact information for each college of who the accessibility services coordinator is, so that if you have specific questions for that person, you can reach out to them. That's what generally gets updated the most if there were a change in personnel. So I wanted you to have access to the most accurate information. All right, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the definition of disability and really what we're looking at when we meet with a student who might need some accommodations. So this is what's defined under the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's a person with a disability is somebody who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. They can have a history of this or record of impairment, or they can be eligible potentially for services under a disability if they're perceived by others to have such an impairment. The law is a little gray at the post-secondary level as far as what they define as substantially limits. We'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate that with a student when we meet with them under the student process. Examples of major life activities: eating, sleeping, speaking, breathing, walking, thinking, concentrating, learning. So those are some of the things that when we meet with a student, we're asking them to be able to share with us how their diagnosis or disability impacts those functional limitations related to those major life activities. All right, Melissa's going to talk to us a little bit about the differences between high school and college, and this is spread out over a couple of slides, so I will just keep pace with her.
Thank you. Okay, so, you know, often in high school you hear about special education, IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. At the post-secondary college level, you'll hear the term accessibility services, accommodations, and our rules and regulations are guided by the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA Amendment Act of 2008 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so what you might notice, or what we'll talk about, is the fact that what we have and what we offer at the college level is more similar to a 504 at the high school level than an IEP. For high schools, we have that they have to provide a free, appropriate public education, also known as FAPE. And in college, it's just about access. Legally, students have to be able to access our buildings, our curriculum. Do they have an equal opportunity? So, you know, again, looking at high school, education is a right, and it must be provided in an appropriate environment to all students. For college, it's an opportunity. So students will still have to meet admissions criteria defined under the ADA as otherwise qualified. So for example, there are colleges that will have very specific admissions criteria, or we have certain programs, such as our nursing programs, that might have very specific criteria. Otherwise, students have access if they are otherwise qualified. So if they are able to be here with or without reasonable accommodation, then they certainly have access. They need to meet health, character, technical standards, code of conduct, and course objectives. All right, the school district is typically responsible in high school to identify a student's disability, provide the testing. Here at the college level, students have to self-identify. So they come and connect with us. So that can be different for students. That's definitely something to chat about with your students. And, you know, in order to have accommodations, they need to go through a process with us. And so we'll talk a little bit about that process, but certainly, you know, it's different in high school because that process just sort of happens and is not necessarily initiated by the student. Okay. So a little bit more about some differences. As I mentioned, in the K through 12 setting, the district provides the testing and evaluation for students. At the college level, the students have to provide that testing or evaluation or some sort of verification to us. So students that had an IEP in high school might have that information that they can provide to us. Others might be looking to get verification, let's say for a health condition, from their medical provider. So colleges don't provide those services. We don't have people or services to evaluate students, but if students don't have evaluations, we could certainly chat with them and brainstorm places where they can go and be tested if needed. So the school at the K through 12 level, the school district develops the IEP or 504 plan to sort of define the services. And here at the college level, once the student identifies themselves, we talk about their needs. They're requesting services through us to develop a letter of accommodation. And that accommodation letter is available to all eligible students. My apologies. So IEPs do not transfer over to college. So the laws and and regulations that support IEPs, and when the student is no longer in high school. So that's what's really important. I think a lot of students will think, because they're so used to, let's say, an IEP or a 504 kind of traveling with them, because the school automatically takes care of it, has the IEP meetings, and they have an IEP in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9, 10, 11, 12, and they assume that it's just going to be in effect in college. But unfortunately, that's not how that works. And also a lot of things that may be on an IEP or a 504 might not be able to be an accommodation at the college level. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's an interactive process. Students come to us, they have certain paperwork and evaluations or documentation they need to provide. And then we work with that student in figuring out what their needs are and what will be appropriate for the college level. And we don't provide personal services or services that are, of a personal nature. So whereas in high school, a student might have a person or an aide for medical or physical things, and the district is required to provide those. At the college level, we are not required to provide personal services. So we might help students look into getting those services for themselves if they need it. And certain, we don't have aides in the classroom to help with education with students. So those are conversations that we have to say, well, that might be, you had a paraprofessional in high school, but that's not something, we don't allow other people in the classroom in the college setting unless it's a personal care attendant. And we don't provide those personal care attendants, but students and families can certainly hire somebody and have somebody come with the student if they were to need that. And that's a discussion that happens with the student and their family and us.
I'm just
Okay.
gonna pause here to see if there's any questions,
Yes, I know these are,
because that's a
these are
lot of
long slides.
information. No
No
questions?
questions?
I have a question. This is Nancy from Exeter.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Well, first of all, thanks for doing this. And this all makes sense to me because I'm very familiar with this process. And so I'm guessing that we're going to get to how this applies to a student taking a class at the high school for this.
Yes.
Okay.
Hang tight.
Yes.
I'm ready. I'm excited about it.
Good. I love it. So yeah, we'll try to kind of breeze through the rest of this part here. So as you know, in high school, you're contacted by the special education staff. In the college level, students are responsible for presenting their plan to their faculty. And the reason why it's important to make some of these distinctions is because we have early college classes, as you know, that happen on the high school campuses, but we also have students who come here as well to take their early college classes. So again, on IEPs, fundamental alterations or modification of a program or curricula are required so that the student is kind of, learning at where they're at. In college, however, no alterations or modifications are required. Students have equal opportunity to pursue courses, but they are evaluated at the same objective as other students. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I think that tends to be a common question, Nancy, in terms of, okay, well, a student has an IEP that says they will have less writing, or that they, have to answer only half of the math questions, and certain things along that nature, or they're allowed to use study guides for their exams. And in the college level, that would be considered, those things might be considered fundamental alterations or modifications. So again, IEP, strengths and challenges are determined by specialists. Here at the college level, you know, we're helping students continue to develop their self-advocacy skills. We work with students. We also have tutors and whatnot that can help with time management, organization, things like that. But you know, we're helping the students kind of figure out, based on, you know, their experiences in high school, what their strengths and challenges are. Okay.
All right, so I think to get to your question a little bit, Nancy, we're going to talk about the process for students and kind of what they have to do on their end. Joanna, if you're
Yeah.
to go.
All right, how do students access accommodations from the community colleges? I always tell students, especially during orientation times, it's really quite an easy process. I always say it's you know, 3 steps. We'll break it down a little bit, but going with what Melissa was saying earlier, it's really important for the students to identify their needs. So something that you'll hear each one of us say during, you know, an orientation or maybe even an open house is, no, your IEP does not get automatically transferred over with your transcripts. So a lot of students, you know, misinterpret like, okay, well, my grades went over, but it's not the same with an IEP or a 504 plan. So what we need to do is have the student contact accessibility services, a coordinator, somebody, like generally they can, you know, get through to any staff member and say, where's accessibility services? They'll get pointed to our direction so we can, you know, initiate the conversations and what's needed for the students to pass in so that we can work with them. So first step is, you know, contacting us and disclosing their disability. At that point, we do, a lot of our colleges under the CCSNH system do have different procedures or protocols in getting started, which is still simple. Some of us use the online, like they can access our applications to register with accessibility services through our websites. Some students still prefer the old pen and paper trick where they fill out the actual application and hand it in. And our applications are basic information like what's your, you know, what's your name, what's your ID number, what email is your student email, so that way there we can start corresponding. And that's an opportunity for our students to provide us with documentation of their diagnoses. And a lot of times the students will disclose to us on the application the information on the associated functional limitations as it relates to their major life activity that is presenting a barrier to education. And as Melissa was saying earlier, some common sources of documentation are the 3-year evaluations that students get in the K through 12 area. But we do also, if there is no evaluation, we do have other avenues to obtain documentation. So we would look for something like a 504 plan. We definitely have used their IEPs, and we tried to get them as closely related to the college accommodations as we can, with some few variances, as Melissa had stated earlier. We can also utilize medical reports from practitioners, mental health professionals, counselors, therapists, anybody. I always tell them, anybody that has special letters after their name can be a great help. So we do have documentation that could be provided to a provider. We call it a disability verification form. And that can also be very helpful for us to develop a college letter of accommodation. The third step is, once we receive the application and documentation piece, the accessibility coordinator will usually find a time to meet with the student and their family members if they would like to join. Oftentimes they do, which is also very helpful. And then during that discussion piece, we call it the interactive process. We can really narrow down into like, what's the greatest barrier for the students, and, you know, it can come down to what classes they're taking, how are they taking it, whether it's in person or online. And during that meeting, we developed the letter of accommodation. And then it is the student's responsibility to provide that letter to people like yourselves who are going to be teaching a college level course. Again, it's the students being proactive on their part. So we're teaching them to empower and advocate for themselves. So those letters should be coming from your students.
I know there's quite a bit of questions that have come up in the chat. I don't know, Shauna, if we want to look at any of those or.
Nope, it's just me being crazy. Thanks, Kara,
Okay.
for the question.
All right,
All
so I think this kind of goes hand in hand, and then maybe there's some questions that come up about like specifics of how to make this work in your setting, but let's talk a little bit about teacher responsibilities.
All right. For students that are pursuing the college credit in the courses that you are teaching, the student is not eligible for accommodations or modifications outlined in their IEP or 504 plan. Good examples are if the student's IEP plan says for a math homework, the student has to complete 5 assignments, whereas the rest of the class is maybe doing 10. That is not something that would be covered in a college level course. I always tell our students that you are being held to the same standards, regardless of disabilities, of what your classmates are doing. So though you may have some barriers, we're finding ways to remove those barriers that prevent you from learning or having access to the things that you need. So at the end of the day, all students are meeting the same technical standards and course objectives. Students must complete a letter of accommodation with the accessibility services coordinator at their respective community college. So that's true. If you are taking a class, so I imagine, like, let's take Nancy again from Exeter. I am imagining, just based on the demographics, you'd probably be under the hat of Great Bay. I could be wrong if I'm not geographically correct, but for example, someone taking a class at Merrimack Valley High School most likely would be working with our early college representative, Mark, and that would fall, they might be wanting to take the class closer to the NHTI, so that would be Concord, and we would be meeting. Then you can provide the accommodations outlined in the LOA only. So as teachers of these classes, it's important to remember that though the student may have an IEP for high school, the accommodations for college, because it is a college class and we're bound to, because we have the, how do I want to say it? The rules to follow for our accreditation policies, that we're following the college accommodation so that these credits will be in fact transferable to other universities or colleges in the future. So we're just maintaining the integrity of being an accredited institution. The LOA will focus on academic accommodations and not school access. So this is interesting because at each one of our colleges throughout CCSNH, we've tried very hard to maintain the maintenance of elevators, walkways, parking areas. We don't have that jurisdiction at your colleges. So this is a little bit different, where we're not going to be able to know if you have a nurse on duty or should they need access for medication. So unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to provide any feedback because we're not there physically in your schools. Academic accommodations will focus on access to the student's education and may include things like extensions for timed assessments, things like access to your notes, and any assistive technology. There's many examples I'm sure we can go over, but another good example is the ability to audio record lectures so that students can review later on, take notes. They also utilize digital textbooks, and sometimes that can help them increase their abilities to take notes as well.
All right, I'm gonna pause again and ask if anybody has any questions. Okay. So we put together some common examples that we see that we think you might see as in the high school setting that might come up that are going to be different than how things are implemented in college. So some of the more common things that we see that we think might be questions or things that come up as you're involved day to day in working with these students are things like general extensions of due dates or assignment dates. So typically we are set up a little differently than a high school class that might meet every day. So we're really looking at this from a discussion perspective on what is going to be reasonable for that particular class. And if we are to identify that a student may need an extension of due date or assignment date for something related to their medical condition, it's meant to be an occasional accommodation. It's not something that we will just blanketly say, you have an extension on everything you turn in. You just need to let your teacher know. Because we have standards, the class has standards that the student needs to be able to meet. So I think that might be a common one. Retakes of an exam. I know that I have a recent high school student, and they're based on assessments, and they get to retake assessments if they don't have competence of the material that is being evaluated in the class. So at the college level, there are no retakes. If you take a timed exam, your grade on the timed exam is your grade. Melissa mentioned a little bit ago about like formula cards or notes for exams or quizzes. Again, this is something we would individually evaluate for a student, but it would need to be clearly defined in the documentation to support that request. And it would be information only to assist with memory and not specific answers to questions. Course modifications. This has been talked about a couple times. We don't reduce any assignment expectations. The student has to meet that same objectives, those same standards as any other student who's going to get credit for that class. Melissa also talked a little bit about the personalized services. So there's no paraeducator support for students that are taking college level classes. So I feel like this has come up before where somebody maybe had a one-on-one support based on their IEP. However, if they're going to be taking the class for college credit in the high school setting, they are not able to utilize that paraeducator support for that class because it is not an accommodation that we would provide at the college level. And then timed assessments. So I feel like school districts do this a little different. I know we've probably all have experience reviewing IEPs. Sometimes it's like clearly defined that it will be a 50% extension of time or 100% extension of time. But the student will be held to some type of time expectation for any type of timed assessment. We will not provide an accommodation to make the assessment untimed. That's just logistical purposes on our end. We have to be able to administer that. So those are some of the common things that we came up with that might be something you come across as you're working with students. But I want to pause here and see what types of questions people might have on kind of what your role and responsibility is or how something works specifically in your school. We're trying to make this as informative as possible. So if there are things that you've experienced or questions that you have that we can talk about as a group, it would be great to be able to share them.
Hi, I do have one question. I'm Jennifer Strongrain from.
Oh, did we lose you, Jennifer?
I think you
I
muted
muted
by
myself
accident.
again. Sorry. I'm Jennifer from Concord Regional Technical Center, and I'm pretty sure based on what you've already shared out, I know the answer to this. But lately, we've been seeing a lot of students who are allowed to have access to a resource room or a learning center to take their test. We obviously, we don't have such a facility at CRTC to be able to even accommodate that to begin with. But if they're also doing that early college credit with through the community college system, I'm assuming that they would not be allowed to do that under those circumstances too, because it wouldn't be allowed at the college level.
Yeah, that's a good question. We do look at accommodations around like what we call distraction limited testing environment. So if we were to meet with the student and discuss their accommodations for that class and decide that the student would be eligible for that, then we would look at indicating that in the letter of accommodations that you as the teacher would be implementing for them in the classroom. So I guess potentially, depending on the student's disability and how it impacts test taking, that might be something that we would look at, but we don't define that. This is where it comes down to like, I'm thinking about like our 7 campuses are set up very differently for testing accommodations. So there's no guarantee that a student's going to have like a separate space to do their exam. We are just indicating that they need a distraction limited space to be able to complete that exam.
So we do offer that, Jen, in terms of, we do, like at MCC, we have a testing center. It's a testing room. And like Amanda said, it's, not a room all to themselves. It's, hopefully reduced distraction. And so that is available to college students. But certainly it sounds like every, even high schools have different facilities and those types of things. And I think, Amanda, you were saying this earlier in terms of, we don't always know what one campus has and what one doesn't. So certainly, if we have put something on a plan and let's say that thing is not available at your location, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us and say, how do we work this on this campus?
Great, thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Danny Brigham. I work at Burlington Tech Center in Vermont, actually. Quick
Welcome.
question. So I see the time test can be evaluated for extension of time. How additional time might that be given? Because we only have our students for 2 hours and 20 minutes. And so our tests are made to run for about an hour. So we can give a max of that additional hour and 20 minutes, but then at that point they need to leave. Like they literally are getting on buses. So is it, have we typically given past, ×2 or is that kind of like the typical max that might be given?
Typically it's time and a half. And some students, depending on their diagnosis and disability, can be up to double time.
Okay, good.
So in your situation, let's say a student had the max, had like double time, and your test was supposed to be an hour, that student could have up to 2, which should hopefully stay within the realm of what the time frame you got working.
Perfect. Answer my question. Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right, so I'm just gonna I guess reiterate some points that we talked about. I think like the important things to take away are just making sure that the student knows, and probably put this ownership on you as the teacher a little bit because you're the one seeing the student day to day. But if they are going to pursue that course for college credit, that they know that they need to connect with us if they want to pursue any accommodations for that course so that we can go through that interactive process with them and help them evaluate it. There's a lot of onus on the student when they get to the college level. So typically when we meet with the student and draft the letter of accommodation, the student then takes responsibility for providing that to you as the teacher or instructor for the class. And I think the other big thing that Joanna talked about, I think really well, did a good job talking about why we have to ensure that we're only providing the accommodations that the college would provide for the students, even though they're in your high school class, is that we want to make sure that that class that they're getting college credit for is going to continue to be accepted by other institutions so that they're getting the opportunity to transfer that credit in and that we're keeping those accreditation standards. Joanna, I see that you have your hand raised.
I do. I just wanted to touch base too on, it sounds like we're kind of, like no more paraprofessionals and no more help. I just wanted to circle back to, when students are, and I also actually have a question too, probably for you, Shauna, to clarify something. When we're trying to, establish the boundaries for college students and, accessing their colleges and classes on a high school level. I'm wondering if these teachers are doing it through Canvas, like our college classes do here.
I
And the
think the
reason why
vast
I'm
majority are not.
Oh, okay. All right. So then my point is probably moot. So I'm gonna stop, not to confuse anybody. But thank you. Because I was just gonna circle back to, like, when we have students here on the college level, if you are using Canvas, there's tutor availability through BrainFuse. So we're not trying to send them to the wolves or anything, but making them kind of look for the help, and how to obtain like a tutor or something to that effect.
So Joanna, to that point, we always say that the early college at the high school students have access to the same academic supports, such as tutoring.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't necessarily tell folks how to access that information, right?
Right.
So would a student need to have access to their CCSNH username and password in order to access BrainFuse?
Yes.
Yes, but I think it would also only be through that portal. But with that being said, each one of our facilities do have college coaches or tutors available to do like study solution. I call it study solutions, but for lack of a better word, time management skills and organization, time management, those kinds of things are available to any of your students
Okay.
that would be
The
taking
issue,
high school class.
yeah, the issue with the students taking college classes in the high school is that they don't access their CCSNH credentials. They don't need them for the day-to-day operations of the class. So they receive them at point of registration, but they don't use them. So is there a good way for students who are maybe in a college class in the high school setting, but would like to come to the college for some support? Is that a drop-in situation? I'm sure it's different across the 7 schools.
Good question. I'm quite certain that we probably all have different operations and different hours. With that being said, I know I can speak to NHTI. They do have an open math lab till 7 p.m. at night. So if the class happens to be math related, they're welcome to come onto our campus. No appointments needed. And same thing goes for Writing Center on a different during a different time frame. They close a little bit earlier, but that information should be also located on each one of our websites with the hours of operation for probably listed under, let me think, resources, student resources, or something to that effect.
Okay, what I'll do, we have a new early college Google Workspace, and I'll look to find those links and I'll put those there so that teachers and school counselors can access those.
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess similar at MCC, we have tutors that can help with time management and organization, can help with math, can help with the writing process. And then depending on the availability of the tutors that we have, we have someone who can do behavioral science classes, or maybe someone who can do some chemistry or something like that. So we will have on our website kind of like our tutor schedule and what tutors are here for what subjects. And typically students can make appointments with those tutors. There are also opportunities to drop in, but I know it's more that if a student drops in, but the tutor already has a scheduled appointment, then they would not be available. So that's it's better to have an appointment if possible, but that's at MCC, everyone might be a little bit different.
Yeah, and just to loop this back to kind of what we talked about today, I know when Melissa was talking about the differences between high school and college, we talked about the fact that post-secondary education is not required to provide any personalized services. But to your point, Shauna, and what we've just been talking about, the students do have access to the tutoring support on all of our campuses. They also have access to coaching if that's something that the campus provides, academic coaching. And I commonly work with students who have like time management or executive functioning skill deficits. And that's something we do one-on-one in coaching. So there are some supports available for the students still. It's just not built in as an accommodation.
And it's outside of class and not during.
Right.
Right.
All right, awesome. Some great information. Does anybody have any questions for these accessibility pros? This is your opportunity.
No
I just
question
have-
is stupid or silly.
I have an easy one, I think. What would the turnaround time be? So I'm just envisioning, a student signs up for a class and then they fill out the materials necessary to get an LOA from the college. What's the turnaround time on that? Because if that may be a decision-making piece for them if they want to continue to try to do that for college credit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it probably depends a little bit on the campus.
Okay.
I tend to be quick within a couple of days.
I know you do, Amanda, because you're off.
I will be reaching out. I think, we all, to that point, we all are one person employees on each campus, and some of us have other jobs than just accessibility. So, but I think we do try to prioritize that as much as possible. I know that I actually had a student reach out to me that we met a couple weeks ago, even though they're not even like a student yet in the system, because that deadline hasn't hit yet. So I think to your point, if you can reach out to those students, as much in advance that might need to talk
Yep.
about accommodations so that we can connect with them and get them turned around in that time period where they have to make that decision by.
Awesome. I just want to make sure they have all the information, best
Yep.
information to make a decision for themselves. Thank you.
And that, to Amanda's point, we certainly try to work as quickly as possible. Sometimes it can depend on the time of year. If it's the very beginning of the semester, we have a lot of students that surprise, wait till the last second to come in. And because we're one-person departments, that can make things a little challenging at times. So sometimes we ask people have a little bit of patience with us, but we try to do work as quickly as possible. Just to give a quick reference, you know, some of us have upwards of 200 students. And, and so yeah, sometimes we're a little bit busy and we have to kind of juggle, and but we do the best we can, and hope that people can make good decisions.
All right, Derek, I see your hand up. Oh, did he disappear?
Nope, I haven't disappeared. So, and again, this is, I mean, a little unique because we have 5 aligned colleges, so this really is more towards your Shauna. Eventually, it would be nice if we could get a letter that has all of the accessibility coordinators there, because we have connection to 5 different community colleges. So like Amanda, I'm gonna probably reach out to you because of our veterinary science. But you know, it'd be nice if we had a document that had all of them in one spot. That's why I was trying to find it on the workspace.
No, that's good to know, and I'll add that as a resource.
And eventually, Shauna, we're actually working as a team on a system accessibility webpage. So certainly when we have that, that'll be good for people to access as well.
No, that's awesome. That sounds great. And we will be putting this presentation and the recording up on the new Google Work site. I've got the link in the chat for those of you who don't have it yet. And that's just a brand new resource that we'll continue to build out.
And just another thing to note, it may not be relevant for everybody, but you'll notice, so people will come to their respective campuses where they're near, where their credit might be at, but we create a letter of accommodation that can actually be used across CCSNH campuses. So what's nice is if a student is taking early college classes and sets up an accommodation plan with Amanda, if once they're done with high school and they come to MCC because they want to take our welding classes, then Amanda can send me that information and students don't have to continue jumping through hoops and create a new plan. So that's just something to note.
So let me just correct my understanding. Does this mean that if in Derek's case, he's got a student who's taking a Manchester class, once you create that accommodation, that student can use that for a Great Bay class in the high school? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, anything else? All right, my thanks to the presenters, great information. I learned a lot. My thanks to those who attended and took the time. If there's anything else that we can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to stop recording. Oh, geez.